let's move on to the heavy hitter in the Pac-12, USC. Now, I know a lot of people, you included, will say, "Oh, hang on, let's talk about Utah." But USC, despite losing the Pac-12 championship last year, despite losing the Cotton Bowl, is the championship favorite out of the conference this year. Right? Lincoln Riley enters his second season at USC. Josh Henson did a wonderful job as both the offensive line coach and the OC last year. Alex Grinch is there. I think he's taken a lot of credit. I think this is a stolen valor situation where, listen, I don't believe he has anything to offer a program like USC, but he's there and may even be holding the USC defense back. I don't know. We'll see. The track record isn't good, but all that to say, USC went 11-3 last season, 8-2 in conference. They had that heartbreaking loss in the Pac-12 championship game to Utah. Then they follow it up and lose to Tulane in inexplicable fashion in the Cotton Bowl, kind of punching away a multi-score lead with 8 minutes left in that ball game. And despite the flat tire that they kind of had to deal with at the end of the season, Caleb Williams comes back. He's without a doubt another going to be the Heisman favorite this year. He's the easy favorite to go number 1 overall in the NFL draft in 2024 as we sit here in the preseason. And I think that the sky is truly the limit for this USC ball club, right? 11-3 a season ago. I don't see why you couldn't anticipate USC going 11-1, 12-0. So you get a look on the YouTube side at some of their offensive rankings from last year. The offense was incredible, and that is without a doubt the team's strength. The team weakness, though, might be the offensive line. They were a little inconsistent last year. And so I'm curious to see how Josh Henson, who is a very good offensive line coach, curious to see how he kind of rallies the troops there. There's a ton of turnover on that line, potentially 3 new starters coming in from Washington State, from Florida, from Wyoming. And you know this, anytime you have multiple pieces coming on the offensive line, especially, it can be tough to get them to gel immediately. But looking into the offense a little bit further, you see on the screen right now, offense was number 3 in total, in scoring, and in passing offense last season. Caleb Williams threw for 4,500 yards, 42 touchdowns, just 5 interceptions. The wide receivers are really, really good once again. Now, Jordan Addison is a Minnesota Viking, so he's gone, but in comes Dorian Singer from Arizona, the leading receiver a season ago for the Wildcats. He's now a Trojan. You've got Mario Williams. You've got Michael Jackson, Taj Williams, all back. And then, oh, by the way, Garrett, you get Marshawn Lloyd to transfer over from South Carolina to lead the running back room. This offense is incredibly scary, even if they're a half team. And I don't necessarily think they're going to be a half team. We'll get to the defense in a second. But even if they are, can this USC team run the table or go 11-1 and get back to a Pac-12 championship game?
I think it's on the table. I don't know that you can say if they're a half team they'll get there, and that's kind of my big contention. I personally have them projected at 11-1 and getting back, but running the table would be something special. If you look at the schedule, I mean, there's a lot of tough games in their schedule. Like you were saying, like there's just a lot of opportunities for people to cannibalize themselves this year in the Pac-12, and you've got Washington and Oregon late. UCLA is never an easy game. Utah towards the end of that schedule, right after a trip to Notre Dame. There's some real opportunities to slip there, and there's a lot of these teams that are really good, so they have to bring their A game every week if they're going to run the table in this conference. This isn't the kind of conference where you can just, kind of get hyped up for 1 or 2 games and make sure that you're good. That's not the way that the Pac-12 is going to be this year. With that being said, I do think that this is a pretty elite team, and I do think that right now I would probably, and I'm not going to say this yet because I haven't done my projections on everything yet, but I'd say probably right now they'd be one of my favorites to make the playoff just based on the way that they're positioned this year. But yeah, man, I mean, this is a tough schedule. I don't think that they can do it all. I think right now the only game I have them losing is that late game at Oregon. Just because you have to go on the road end of the season.
Yep.
And, you're still talking about Bo Nix up there with the Oregon Ducks. We'll talk about them again in a second. But I think that the big key for them is just going to be continuing to be able to run the football as well as they did, because that's kind of the unsung hero of last season. They're a pretty solid running team. Not always, but they were pretty solid on the ground, and in a lot of their big games when they needed it, they were able to come up with the big run play. And some of that was the Caleb Williams scrambling, but a lot of that was just saying, hey, we need the yards. We're going to pick this up now. I think especially in their game against UCLA, there were some big moments where they picked up the yardage on the ground and found a way forward that way. So with the new offensive linemen, again, the turnover at running back, I think Marshawn Lloyd's going to be amazing. Honestly, I think he's going to do really, really well. But the turnover on the offensive line is still going to be tough. Late in the season, that should be figured out. But sometimes we see it happen to where it just never quite clicks, right? And they never quite get to that point that they need to be. Any step back could be a problem for them. But again, this is me trying to nitpick here. Still
Right.
not 100% sold on the defense. I think the defense for me, and I don't know, jump in if I'm totally wrong on this one, but for me, the defense is really just a cautiously optimistic. Like, I think that they picked up the pieces. I think, okay, Bear Alexander. Okay,
Yeah.
you got a lot of guys. Mason Cobb from Oklahoma State, best linebacker, I think, from the portal. There were a lot of guys that they added that I think should play better, but we're just going to kind of have to wait and see how they pick up the scheme, kind of wait and see how they actually all play together, and wait and see if there's any weak points on that defense that other offenses can keep, kind of attacking and addressing. If they can figure out the defensive side,
Yeah.
I'll put my hands up. They might run the table.
The only question I have on the defensive side of the ball is, what does the secondary actually do? They were very very inconsistent. Had a hard time getting off the field sometimes on third downs. 109th in third down conversions allowed at 42.9%. They also weren't elite in the red zone, but their sacks and tackles for losses are going to should take a step forward this
They
year.
should,
You mentioned Bear Alexander coming over from Georgia. Jack Sullivan comes over from Purdue. Keon Bars comes over from Arizona. So that defensive line is maybe the best in the Pac-12. Kind of right up there with Washington, I think, for the best defensive line. The linebackers you talked about, Mason Cobb transfers over from Oklahoma State. He was the most sought after linebacker early on in the portal. I think Omar Spates, who leaves Oregon State to go to LSU, was probably right there with him. And then they also have Shane Lee, who returned 78 tackles this season to go for the Trojans. So the front seven, Garrett, to me, is really locked. The question is, what does that secondary do? I think if that secondary can be decent, to me, the absolute floor, the absolute floor is 9-3. And that's if you have injuries, that's if you have a lot go wrong. The schedule is tough. 3 big home games: Utah, Washington, UCLA. They all play them at home. On the road, they take on Notre Dame and Oregon. And I'm with you. I have them going 11-1. The only loss that I have them sustaining during the regular season is to Oregon, that November 11th weekend.
Mhm.
That's right after you play Washington. That's right before you play UCLA. It's not a trap game because I don't think USC is going to fall asleep at the wheel playing Oregon on the road. But that is a very, very tough 3-game stretch. You're likely playing Washington for a spot in the Pac-12 championship game. You're doing the exact same against Oregon. And then you're taking on your, supposedly your most hated rival in UCLA. So I think the Trojans stock absolutely is up. I do believe that they can win the Pac-12 championship this year, go into the college football playoff with a 12-1 record, and then, we'll see who they get matched up against. We've got an episode about the playoffs coming down the pipe, but USC, without a doubt, I think should be the favorite here.
Gracious, how